Welcome, fellow dragon enjoyer. Let's talk about one of my favorite commander decks, the greediest Dragon deck imaginable. All gas, no breaks, and more mana cards and dragons than the table can handle. There's also a strong theme in this deck that will make it different to any other Dragon deck you've seen, so stick around. Any self-respecting dragon deck has to be filled to the brim with big, flashy dragons, and that is definitely the case here. My inner 12-year-old Timmy, that wanted all the big, cool cards, but couldn't afford them, is living his dream. And this is one of my more blinged out decks, with plenty of alt arts and beautiful cardboard. It's a deck that embodies being a dragon, big, powerful, greedy, and not concerned with the affairs of lesser mortals. We're out to do what we want to do, and good luck if you get in our way. And if this looks like fun to you, and by this, I mean churning out a huge dragon army and generating upwards of 100 mana and 25 cards, then you're in the right place. But there are some surprises with how this translates into the cards in the deck, so we'll start with what my card choices are, and why, followed by why I've built the deck the way that I have, and how to play it, starting with the dragons and Dragonborn Champion. Every time we hit someone for 5 or more damage, we get to draw a card, which is pure stonks after a turn or two. Dramoka, the Eternal, hits the board, and immediately starts handing out permanent buffs like Oprah. He's a great way to deal with the rare occasion that someone's creatures are bigger than ours. Nicol Bolas the Ravager is the cutest of all the dragons. If we manage to flip him, he draws us cards, removes tricky threats, and can bring back a key dragon. Zurgo in Ojutai is arguably one of my favorites. Comes out on turn 4, has haste and hexproof, and replaces himself with card advantage. Then there's Dragonlord Ojutai. While not quite as good as his namesake, is still doing exactly what we want by generating card advantage in the same way. Furkrag keeps us safe from scary creatures in the mid-game, and nets us cards while he's at it. It's a win-win. Niv Mizzet Reborn is one of the most powerful cards in our deck, which is why we've built around him. He will likely generate 3 to 5 cards advantage on the spot, and he's free to cast with Morophon out. He also creates a keyword nightmare for opponents when paired with Scion of Draco. Niv Mizzet Supreme, like his namesake, allows us to abuse color pairs in our spells, recycling our ramp, removal, and protection later in the game. Then Niv Mizzet Guildpact is an equally beefy boy that likely draws us cards when he attacks. Just what the ancient dragon ordered. Sign of the Dragon is everything everywhere all at once. Nothing quite like sneaking out an ancient silver dragon trigger on turn 5. It's absolutely filthy behavior. Two-headed Hellkite is a scary, hasty dragon that draws us 2 cards on attack. Perfect. Then there's Tiamat. This is almost more of a Tiamat deck than it is an Dragon deck. Getting us 5 of our best dragons puts us in an incredibly strong spot, and it's a key play to aim for every game. Dragonlord Dramoka is our ultimate answer to control decks and instant speed interaction. The lifelink is also not to be underestimated, as we will definitely take damage in the early game while we're setting up. Dragonlord Kolaghan is mainly a haste enabler, as haste has the power to turn our big combo-like turns into an instant win. Then there's Miriam Sentinel Worm. I don't think I need to explain why this notorious dragon is in here. Allowing us to play double dragon in Commander is simply too good. Velomachus Lawhold gets us free spells, and Belladros Witherbloom gives us a bunch of chump blockers and allows us to do some nutty things by untapping all our lands. Clouth is the first of 3 key options to make more mana than we know what to do with. Ancient Copper Dragon adds a bit of gambling to the mana creation process, but as a benefit we get treasures that stick around across turns. Old Norbone answers the question, what if we combined Clouth and Ancient Copper Dragon into one card, and can be game-winning by himself? Ancient Silver Dragon is the greediest of all the greedy dragons. I almost expect this ability never to resolve, because if it gets by opponent's removal, this amount of value is game-winning by itself. Scion of Draco turns our 5-color dragons into keyword soup monsters. Giving them first strike, hexproof and lifelink makes us almost impossible to deal with, unless the Scion is dealt with first. Cavernhorde Dragon is a bit more limited than our core mana trio of Clouth, Copper and Norbone, but is still an absolute banger if we want to sit atop a pile of treasure. Ramos can be a game-winning beater if left unchecked, and can create an enormous burst of mana for some seriously flashy turns. Morophon is a critical combo-like enabler in our deck. Being paired with 5-color dragons is broken, and cards like Tiamat and the Niv Mizzets can create absolutely explosive turns. And last but definitely not least, the Ur-Dragon itself. Makes everything cheaper, draws us tons of cards, and cheats things into play. It rarely resolves, but when it does, it's absolute cinema. You'll notice there's a ton of great dragons that I'm not running in my deck list. As example, there's the Ancient Brass and Bronze Dragons, Terror of the Peaks, Twin Flame Tyrant, Scale Lord Reckoner, and Bonehorde Dracosaur, to name a few. These are active choices because, despite the fact that they are fantastic creatures, they don't fit in with what I want my deck to do or how I want it to play. If you want to build a deck similar to this, you can of course add in as many of these as you like, but by the end of this video, I imagine it will be clear why I didn't add these into mine. Moving on from dragons, we have our cost reducers, with the most interesting of these being Sarkhan's Solar Flame. His ability to become a copy of another dragon can be game-breaking when paired with dragons like Mirim, Old Gnawbone, or of course the Ur-Dragon itself. Next up, we have some value engines. Up the Beanstalk comes down early and draws us a card every time we play one of our dragons. It's insane card advantage waiting to happen. Then there's Temur Ascendancy. Some cards in Magic just seem too good, and this is one of them. It will trigger almost as often as Up the Beanstalk and gives our creatures haste. It's broken for 3 mana. If we look through our list of dragons for the keyword whenever, we realize that it's almost all of them, which is exactly why we're running the Roaming Throne. Then lastly, we have Annie Joins Up. This won't trigger off of everything, because cards like Ancient Silver Dragon sadly aren't legendary, but it still does enough trigger doubling to make it well worth the while, and it acts as removal when it hits the table. Next up is Rocks and Ramp. But speaking of ramping, 85% of my regular viewers, so statistically you, aren't subbed. I'm ramping my way to 10k subs, so if you're enjoying this, you know what to do. Our mana acceleration is fairly straightforward. In the 2 mana slot, we run a handful of mana rocks and a handful of ramp spells to enable turn 3 dragons, or 4 mana ramp spells. The ramp spells will fetch our Triomes and Shocklands, which is important for when we get Sign of the Ur-Dragon out. We also have a few ramp and draw spells that handily fit into the emerging color pairing theme you've likely noticed. The mana base is what you'd expect in an expensive 5-color deck. Triomes, Fetches, and Shocks, as well as Checklands, Painlands, and some other no-brainers. It's focused on having all the land types in play, and almost all of our lands coming into play untapped after turn 1. Next up, we have 4 tutors. Illidanri's Call gets us any creature we want for 2 mana at instant speed. Tutoring up Tiamat at the end of the turn and surprising the table with it is a great time. Limdor's Vault is similar, but different. An end of turn vault gets us what we want, with a bit more elbow grease required. Bring to Light can't get Tiamat, but it can get a lot of other important things. In particular, our singular and one-sided board wipe in Crux of Fate. Sivitry can do a bunch of other things, including wipe the board, but she's a Tiamat getter first and foremost, 95% of the time. Moving on, we've got our removal and protection package, starting with General Swiss Army Knife style removal in Assassin's Trophy, Anguished Unmaking, and Vindicate. While it doesn't hit creatures, Hull Breach is simply too much value not to run at 2 mana, and our targeted removal is rounded out with Molten Collapse and Terminate. Our protection consists of Dovin's Veto, Counter Squall, and Permission Denied, as almost any answer to our dragons is going to be a non-creature spell. I've already mentioned Crux of Fate, which solves problems and clears the way for our dragons all at once, and look at that art. And our final non-land card is Primeval's Glorious Rebirth, a game-ending reanimation spell if the board is wiped in the late game. It does require a legendary creature on the battlefield, but that's not too hard to handle in this deck. You'll notice the lack of good stuff staples like Teferi's Protection, Swan Song, and Deflecting Swat. That's because my deck is built to subjectively be the most fun for me, and it trades pure power for being greedy and synergy. 5-color commanders tend to come with some baggage, as people feel like they're going to see the same 30-odd non-creature spells that every other 5-color deck runs. The hipster in me wants to make things interesting by not just running the staples. The deck hangs out perfectly in bracket 3, as it's capable of very high highs, but is also vulnerable to disruption. Perfectly balanced, as everything should be. In place of the good stuff, I choose to run a variety of color pair spells to achieve similar goals. And you'll also notice that this theme is also present in my dragon choices. I've done this because a big sub-theme of this deck plays around my Niv Mizzets, giving me huge opportunities for card advantage and greed. This theme gives the deck a unique playstyle and means games don't rely around trying to get the Ur-Dragon out. In fact, the highest highs happen when the Niv Mizzets combine their power. So let's talk about playing the deck. The early game is fairly straightforward. Ideally, we want a hand with 3 lands and a source of ramp. 3 lands plus a 2 and 4 mana ramp spell is Chef's Kiss. Our cost reducers effectively count as a source of ramp as well. Beyond that, we want some form of card draw or card advantage. Bonus points if that's Tiamat, because she is usually the catalyst to our most broken shenanigans. Our early turns are usually spent ramping, after which we start playing dragons, with the main goal of the deck being to get more of everything. More cards, more mana, and of course, more dragons. Nice and greedy. My favorites are a turn 4 Ojutai or Firkrag to get the ball rolling, but beyond that, the deck is fairly flexible. For example, you could play Niv Mizzet Reborn and fill up your hand. Or you could play Belladros and use her untap ability to power out other scary dragons. Or you could play Scion and set yourself up for some filthy combat trigger shenanigans like an ancient silver dragon. There are many ways your game can play out, but ultimately, I think the best line in the deck is finding Tiamat and setting up a huge turn. My favorite targets to fetch are Morophon, Niv Mizzet Supreme, Mirim, and Scion of Draco. In the last slot, there are all sorts of options, like Scion of the Ur-Dragon or Dragonlord Kolaghan for some haste, or maybe Dragonlord Dramoka if you're up against pesky control decks and don't want them ruining your fun with instant speed interaction. Depending how much people attempt to interrupt your game plan, that hopefully sets you up for a turn where get a Morophon, a 2-mana Mirim, 2 free Scions, 2 free Niv Mizzets, and 2 more of something else. If this all plays out without a hitch, this gives you a huge board, but thanks to the Scions, we'll have all sorts of problematic keywords. You'll also refill your hand, and then some, and that should set you up for a win the next turn, if you don't win on the spot. It's at this point that you may be thinking, but I thought this was an Ur-Dragon deck. Where the heck is the Dragon Man? And honestly, in this deck, the Ur-Dragon plays a much more supporting role, where it's the Eminence ability that matters more than anything else. Well, that and the fact that the Secret Lair print is a beautiful shiny dragon that sits in the command zone, cheering us on as their dragon buddies cause chaos, and very occasionally, they'll make a grand entrance and do something incredibly hype, like when a cool mentor flexes their skills in anime. And much like these mentors stand out and are fairly unique, this deck is built to be different. It's almost certainly not the strongest, most streamlined Ur-Dragon deck you could put together, but that's not the point. To me, it's interesting, with novel choices and play patterns that your average Ur-Dragon deck doesn't have. We've all seen that Ur-Dragon deck, using a Hellkite Courser to power out an early Ur-Dragon, or using a turn 3 Terror of the Peaks to ruin our ability to set up a board or have any fun. That's fine if that's what you're looking for, but this is not that deck. It is, however, a hell of a lot of fun to play. If, like me, you love card advantage and power plays, with a side of some of the most beautiful art in Magic. It's an absolute rocket ship when it gets going, and if you resolve a Tiamat or an Ur-Dragon, you usually generate enough value on the spot to win the game, if you're not immediately yeeted out of existence. That's when the deck is at its strongest, as promised, generating tons of mana, cards, and dragons. But on the flip side, you need to be careful that the rocket ship doesn't run out of fuel before it reaches escape velocity, especially as most of our value engines are creatures. We're relying on them, and if they get removed or countered before they net us any card advantage, you can be left top decking. Normally at this point, I talk about upgrades, but until Tarkia rolls around and we get all the new dragons, not to mention Mox Jasper, our shiny new dragon Mox, I don't think I'd recommend anything as an upgrade. I may well have missed an awesome card for the deck, in which case, please tell me in the comments, but if we're sticking with the color pair theme the deck is built around, I think at best, swaps will be side grades to what we have right now. If you abandon the color pair theme, and the focus on card advantage entirely, then there's all those good stuff options I talked about earlier in this video, but again, that's a different Ur-Dragon deck. There are some interesting options, particularly when it comes to color pair spells, that I think could be fun side grades, and I've shown a bunch of them on screen, but I'll leave you to explore them if you intend to build the deck. This is probably my most expensive deck in my collection, and in most cases I'd recommend that you proxy liberally if you want to build it yourself. If, however, you want to live this dragon power fantasy, but don't want to proxy, and you don't have the funds, then I've linked a budget list in the description for you. This includes what I believe to be the best 5-color budget mana base out there that I recently made a video about. I'd love your thoughts on my Ur-Dragon list, and how your lists are different if you have an Ur-Dragon deck of your own. If you've enjoyed this, give a like and go check out either my $100 Spellslinger Sauron or Stellar Lee combo decks. You'll likely enjoy those too. As always, thanks for being here.